All right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I am thrilled to be joined by Chad Warren. And Chad and I go back, well, I don't know, more than a decade, I guess, because I think we first met around Florida State's Giving Day. I think the planning took place in 2011. The actual Giving Day itself took place in January of 2012, which makes it certainly one of the first in higher education, or maybe just in any nonprofit vertical in the world. And that was a lot of fun to plan. Obviously, we're in different spots now. So, Chad, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of background on where you're at today.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. It's been more than a decade. After Florida State, I spent some time at a few other institutions, including Ohio State and the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Returned back to a consulting firm for a few years, and now am grateful to say that I am the president and chief philanthropy officer for the Dominican St. Rose Health Foundation here in Las Vegas.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us today and talking about, again, one of the first giving days in higher education. So, looking back at Florida State's first great give, I can't even remember, but what inspired you to pursue that concept?
A couple of things. Wanted to do something different that hadn't been done. New social media was just in its infancy, and I saw that wasn't a channel that was being really tapped into from a fundraising perspective. And at Florida State, at the time, overseeing annual giving, it was reestablishing the annual giving program. So we needed to increase donor count. And also at the university, they were in the very early phase of what would be a $1 billion campaign that ended, I think, back in 2018. So they were looking at ways to identify new donors. So thought, how can we maximize Facebook and other Tumblr and other social media channels at the time to get the word out and try to corral folks together. I think we called it a money bomb at one point, but yeah, a day of giving. So that was the birth of 36 hours of Florida State's first day of giving.
And, I think all the years between now and then, that was your first, but hardly your last. I mean, Dayton, you and I worked together a few times, I think at UNLV more recently to do some giving days. So what's been consistent? What do you think still works from that first giving day that works today?
The consistent piece, I mean, is the mission of the organization and tapping into the philanthropic hearts of supporters or potential supporters. I think also what's consistent is social media in particular and online has been a new mainstay and only grows. And 11 years ago, I'm not sure, iPhone 1, 2 might have been out, but now everybody has them in the palms of their hands. And so the consistency is the constituents and our just consumer base is engaging in online activity constantly. So a day of giving is where our constituents are, where our funders are. So that's the consistent piece.
I mean, the one thing that I think about is the online ambassador piece, because I think back I think the strategy was just you had an email database, you email people, you ask them to share content, and a lot of them did. And I'm sure there was more sophistication in it than that, but doing that exact same thing today, you probably get crickets. At least that's what we've seen in a lot of other institutions. So what needs to evolve? Like what worked well in 2011, 2012 that you need to think about differently today?
I would say, especially for the organizations that have been doing days of giving for several years, they have got to constantly innovate and constantly make their day of giving different from the years past. There's always something to be said about having consistency, the same day of every year, or a kind of a theme for consistency's sake from a marketing perspective, but to keep donors coming back and to keep increasing your dollars raised and the donors, I think you need to innovate and provide a platform that is donor friendly, user friendly, and matches other markets. So, for an example, reoccurring giving or being able to use a digital wallet. If I can make a transaction through Amazon or buy a pair of shoes through Macy's using a PayPal account, making that available during a day of giving. So staying kind of lockstep with other markets with your day of giving platform, I think is what is important. Also, you've seen, gosh, record-breaking days of giving at institutions. They have to beat each other, year over year. So the establishment, an idea of matches and challenges was something that we didn't even think about back in 2012, but now that's a mainstay as well. And having to grow those matches and challenges to incentivize donors to give, I think that's something that continues to be the norm.
And that was a big chance. I remember, you're right. The first Florida State Giving Day, we were just annual fund, annual fund, annual fund. And then by the time we got to UNLV, we were doing things like closing $250,000 gifts day of, right? Like some big gift activity. So, I mean, it's still for most, I think, a participation engine. But what other areas should you consider? Is it a mid-level tool? Is it maybe a major donor tool for the right major donors? I mean, what's your thought on that?
Well, actually, if you recall, at Florida State, there was a donor that heard about the Day of Giving, did not give online, but he was assigned to a development officer, but because of the excitement around FSU's Great Give, made a $100,000 gift pledge because of the Day of Giving. So it yielded a major gift when we were only annual giving focused. But yes, fast forward to when we worked together most recently, it was a way for both the directors of development to secure major gifts from donors that have been sitting in their portfolio, and they're able to leverage that Day of Giving, saying, will you be the challenge for X, Y, and Z school or college or unit? So that name notoriety. It also was a way for the major gift officers to do that initial outreach to someone that has capacity but had been avoiding meeting with them for a lunch or a dinner. So that was another great avenue to get some excitement around. And, it's that, getting on the same bandwagon. So my friends are giving, so I'm going to as well. That gets people excited to match or unlock those challenges or whatnot. So it can definitely be, and has proven to be, beyond annual giving. Mostly it is, an acquisition or a donor tool. But truth be told, I mean, it's also when you've got 50,000, 200,000 constituents that you have to sift through, and you've got 20-30% of them during a Day of Giving that are brand new. Those are people that are raising their hand, showing interest, that have probably been solicited for decades through other channels, but something happened during that Day of Giving that got them excited to give. So those would be folks that I would want to put into a annual giving officer's portfolio or discovery officer's portfolio. So it can definitely be a new major gift pipeline as well.
So now you're back in the healthcare space, working in the healthcare vertical. And, I wonder, a lot of the giving days we've been around have been in the higher education vertical, but can giving days work outside of higher ed? And if so, have you seen any examples of success recently?
So great question. I love the question. I would say the answer is yes. Are other markets and other nonprofit sectors like healthcare and social justice using days of giving in the traditional sense that higher ed has? I don't see it to the same extent. I do see a lot of other nonprofit organizations leveraging Giving Tuesdays or a state community day of giving where they're part of that, but not as many standalone days of giving for nonprofits like a hospital system or a social justice nonprofit. I look to the country, over the Pacific, Australia, that's a different story. I see a lot of days of giving around healthcare and other initiatives that are standalone days of giving. I do know, fraternities and sororities have their own days of giving. I can think of recently, the University of Cincinnati Health had a day of giving that was specific around health initiatives. There's a children's hospital of King's Daughter that I know does a day of giving. So it's not impossible. I just think it's an unrealized potential for these other nonprofits that for them will be new, not necessarily new for a lot of our audiences, because they probably have an alma mater that's doing a day of giving now, because that is almost part of everyone's arsenal now. But do I think it's possible and should be a part of a annual strategic plan for other nonprofits? Absolutely. And because of the sophisticated tools that exist now, it doesn't leverage as much manpower and human resources as it once did.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think the organizations that are set up to kind of capitalize on a moment in time as well. I think back to, and I forget the name of the organization. It was a hunger relief organization in Indiana, and there was, I think, a radio host that said he would give, like, because there's a snowstorm coming. So the snowstorm coming to Indiana, radio host said, I will give $10 for every inch of snow that falls. I'm going to give it to this nonprofit. Won't you join me? And they raised a massive amount of money because people, so people latched onto that sort of, current events type activity. Um, have you seen anything like that where, there's been something that either, I mean, that's fun. It's a snow story, but sometimes there's more negative things that happen in the news too. And have you seen organizations be successful in that way?
Several months ago, when Ukraine was invaded by Russia, UNICEF had a specific campaign that was targeted towards how you could support the refugees and the devastation of folks in Ukraine. So being able to mobilize in the moment when something happens, where there is a crisis, that's negative press, but there is a definite need. I'm impressed with how quickly we've been able to pivot and be able to create these kinds of money bombs, days of giving, or initiatives very quickly.
I think that's a good point. And like you said, being able to mobilize. And I think that's a strategic decision, to have the tools in place, the technology, a team that can think quickly like that. Over the years, anyway, when we've seen success in that space, that's typically been the case. It's an accident in some respects, but it's also somewhat of a deliberate strategy to be ready for those things.
True.
All right. So what's the future for Giving Days? I mean, where do you see it going from here? It's been, in some sense, a lot of it has not changed, but then there's been evolution as well. And where do you see it going in the future?
I don't think it's going away. I'm impressed with the higher ed institutions that have chosen to do more than one day of giving in a year. Kudos to you. I have seen a few higher ed institutions use a day of giving as a way to launch a larger comprehensive or capital campaign, and leveraging that day kind of as icing on the cake. I think we have to give donors choices. And when I say that, for an example, the tchotchkes and the giveaways, the t-shirts and the socks, or the COVID masks a couple of years ago, when you offer that up as a freebie, or you're maybe a little bit more innovative and are able to say this has a tax benefit to it, when you offer that, then seeing how your donors will choose not to take the t-shirt, they want the full dollar amount to go to your organization. Now more and more, being able to offer to pay for the credit card processing fees and make that a part of your day of giving. I know here at the foundation that I work for, since we turned that on, 60% of the donors that give online select the button to pay for the credit card processing fees. I mean, 60%. Previously, when I was doing some analytics, I know almost a third, about 31% of donors are giving through digital wallet. So having PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay, we have to be where our donors are. And as they are more tech savvy, having that mechanism to be able to give, I think, needs to be part of the playbook that you have with Days of Giving. But at the end of the day, you have to also be able to show your impact of the gift and how the dollars are put to use. If you're doing these annually, for an example, you can't wait until the next year to solicit them again. They need to become a part of your marketing, communication, and solicitation strategy. They may choose to give through snail mail. They may choose to give through email or through texting. Don't remove them from those various channels. We need to see these things multiple times, especially if you're doing an annual day of giving. But it's certainly exciting to see the future. It's been a decade now, 10 years that's officially that Giving Tuesday was an official concept, and to see the early results that $3.1 billion was raised, which is a 15% increase from last year and a 25% increase from 2 years ago. So when we saw all of that heightened awareness around COVID and healthcare, we thought that was the best. And the fact that even with a potential recession, as Americans, we are still giving to charities and nonprofits. That's what's inspiring about continuing to push forward and to make sure that Giving Days are just as important as any other channel within your solicitation strategy.
100%. 100%. All right. Chad Warren, President and Chief Philanthropy Officer at St. Rose Dominican Health Foundation, right? So got it correct. Awesome. And also one of the leaders, one of the brains behind one of the very first giving days before there was Giving Tuesday in higher education at Florida State, when the first Great Give launched in January of 2012. Chad, anything else you want to say?
No, I'll just say go Knowles to the team down there still working there. I'm proud of what the work they do.